Writing a grant, there's a lot of similarities to academic proposal, but it's a little different in a lot of ways. And sometimes no is not really a bad answer, especially if you get feedback in the process, because sometimes you realize maybe this wasn't the best idea, or I can make it better. So, hearing no is not a bad answer. Maybe is a horrible answer because it leaves you in limbo. But sometimes even through this, you get feedback that makes the whole process worthwhile. So keep that in mind. So, kind of what we'll do, talk about the components of a proposal, the elements of the components, and the strategies to increase successful funding. And how many of y'all have ever written a grant? Anybody? Oh, good. Got some people. Probably once you finish your degree, at some point over your career, either if you stay in the academics, you have to write a research grant. If you go out, you're probably maybe some kind of program grant. More than likely, somebody will say, hey, we've got a good idea. Help us find a way to do it. Help us find some money. So, these kind of elements really fall no matter what you do. Some of what I'm talking about will apply to a research grant, some to a program, some to both. But the basic elements of a good, strong, competitive proposal are going to be the same regardless of what you do. One thing I always tell people is, grant writing, it's not some kind of mystic thing that you go into a dark room and somehow this proposal comes out. It's a process, and you have to keep that in mind. I think if you understand that, it helps, because sometimes people just think, you magically come out with these proposals and you magically get this money or different things, but it's really a long process, and it starts with the idea. I mean, you've got to have an idea. You've got to know what you want to do, whether it's a research project, whether it's a program. And I think that's really where I tell people to start. What do you want to do? And, as Dr. Hall mentioned, sometimes when you find these funding opportunities, you have a very limited amount of time to put the proposal together. So, if you know what you want to do and you say, hey, this meets my needs, you can do it very quickly. If you are just looking and say, hey, here's some money, what can we do to get the money? One, you're probably not going to have a strong competitive proposal, but two, it's going to be very hard to come up with a good idea in a short period of time. And I also think if you come up with a good idea, then it's all about matching the funder to your idea, so that you find somebody that wants to help you carry out your idea. And that's a process in and of itself. Again, it's not that your idea is bad, it's just that particular funding source at that time doesn't work. So that's a big key. But then you want to do your research, you want to plan your proposal, put your budget together, and then fine-tune your proposal. And that's kind of what we'll talk about. So your idea, again, you want to define the problem, how you're going to go about doing it. Dr. Hall mentioned this, talk to others. I think that's always a good thing, bounce ideas off your colleagues, talk to other people about how you might do this. Again, grant writing on one hand, it's a solitary thing because, any type of writing activity is kind of solitary, but it also is a cooperative activity. When you work on especially a larger grant, you will see that there's a lot of components that go into it. Different people bring different expertise. You work collaboratively to do this. So sometimes it feels solitary, but it's really a very collaborative thing. One thing when you got an idea that I think is helpful is just to create a one-page summary or abstract. One, that gives you ready in case you see, particularly with foundations, if you see a foundation, you've got something and you could email them and say, here's what I'm thinking, does this work for your foundation? And you can get a real good idea before you start elaborating on that. They can say, yes, this is kind of where we want to go or not. And that's helpful, but it also helps people like me. For the faculty, I tell them to do that because then I've got a good idea of what they want to do, their topic, their methods, some key words, so I can go out and search and find opportunities that meet what they want to do. So, and also I think anytime you take something and put it down into one page very concisely, it makes you think through what you want to do. That's a very hard exercise. It's sometimes easy to write 10 pages and go on, but if you can really be concise, and that's one thing, if you walk away with nothing else about how to, when you write a grant, being concise is probably the best thing I can tell you. Because a lot of these, and you only have a limited amount of words. Some cases you only have a limited amount of characters to say what you need to. So you need to make sure every word counts, every character counts. So you've got an idea, you want to do a little bit of research into your idea. You know, what are your needs? What kind of information supports your needs? This background, demographics, I mean, if you're talking about, it's a program for obesity in Northeast Tennessee, you need to know all those statistics to be able to back up your need. Your solutions, how are you going to go about this? Again, what do you have an innovative approach? Is it replicable? You know, some models. That's probably where, like Dr. Hall was talking about, you look through the literature, you see what's out there, what's available, what you can do. If you're going to do partners, you talk about that. You know, thinking about long-term, how you'd support this. One thing you want to do is review the request funding announcement, RFP, whatever it's called, request for proposals. But you want to look through that very carefully and see what exactly they are asking for, the different components that you need. I mean, one of the things you want to do is, if they ask a question, that you make sure you answer their questions, but you know, also if they ask for additional material, give them whatever they need, but don't overload them with things. So you're ready to put a proposal together. You know, here, no matter the type of proposal, whether it's a grant to the NIH, a grant to HRSA, a grant to the Department of Health, a letter to a foundation, you're probably going to have these 7 elements in any proposal that you put together. And, you know, you'll have an introduction, summary, a needs statement, a needs assessment, your objectives, your methods, your evaluation. You want to talk about sustainability and your budget. And if you notice in the 7, and as we go through this, I'll talk about it, but your introduction and summary is the first item, but it's probably the last thing you should really write. I mean, when you go through all the other things, it's much easier if you do that last. So, you know, your introduction of the applicant organization to the agency. And really what you're trying to do here, in a nutshell, is talk about who you are, your history. You know, if you're writing on behalf of a nonprofit, an organization, you know, what your organization's history, where you're at, who you serve, experience. If you're doing this as an individual, as a researcher, you talk about, you know, your past research, your areas of specialization, things like that. But you want to make sure that the reader understands that you're capable of carrying out the project, that you have the capacity to do it, you have the expertise to do it. And then when you talk about the need for doing this in just a second, that you are the person to address this need. And so, you know, that's kind of the thing you want to convey in this. There's a lot of different ways this gets conveyed. I mean, depending on the form, talk about your mission statement, give a brief history of the organization. Sometimes for research projects, it's, you know, attach bio sketches or CVs of key personnel. But that's what you're trying to do, is show that you're the expert, you're the person that has the expertise and the resources to solve the problem. Your statement, your problem, your need, you'll see this a lot of different ways. Problem justification, a problem statement, a needs assessment, a problem analysis. You know, what you're trying to do is talk about what is the problem. And you want to describe the situation that you're addressing. Again, if it's obesity in Northeast Tennessee, you talk about that, but you want to be very specific. You want to try to be as specific as possible, and you know, what the cause of the problem is and the solutions. again, the problem is a condition, not the lack of an answer. So you would talk, describe that, and that sets up, here's the need. So as you move into the rest of it, you're going to talk about how you address that particular need. Again, the need that you're trying to solve should be a need that the funder is very interested in trying to solve. Or if your area of research should be an area of research that the funder wants to see something happen in. So, again, those two things should match up very much. And there's ways, if you don't know, especially if it's a foundation, that you can look and find what people fund in the past, the levels they fund. There's a lot of stuff you can do, like I say, on that back end that helps. But you can see, usually they'll say these are the areas where we like to give. So you can see very quickly if your need is going to meet with their need. But I think when you describe that, you need to, again, be very specific about stating the need. Then, you set out a need. So what's the objectives? And again, you see different ways these are listed: goals, outcomes, outcome objectives, results, impact, accomplishments. But what are you going to achieve? What are you trying to achieve? And these need to be SMART. And hopefully you've seen this before many times. But they need to be, again, specific. They need to be measurable. You have to have an objective. You have to be able to measure it so you can evaluate it. It has to be achievable. I mean, you can't have a goal of, we want to create world peace. I mean, how are you going to do that? I mean, again, specific, measurable, relevant. It has to be relevant to what you're doing and timely. And that is very important, because when you think of these, usually you're writing a grant for a project, and a project is a specific activity that takes place within a specific time frame. So you have to keep that in mind, that you can do this, and it's achievable, it's relevant to everything, but it's timely, and that you can do it in an amount of time, because that also depends on your budget. If it's a multi-year project, you'll have to think through some of that about how you spend the money over different time periods and stuff like that. So, you need to keep that in mind. Again, define how the need is expected to change as a result of the project. So you have your need, your objectives, and then your methods. And this is the kind of the meat of a narrative. How are you going to do this? And it's a description of the activities that will help you achieve your objectives. You have a process objective, which is the measurable task, the process that will affect your outcomes. You'll see this listed in guidance as, sometimes they want to see an approach and activities, a program plan, a work plan, a project design, a strategy. Depending on the funder, sometimes they want to see a very detailed chart of a work plan. Sometimes it's just a narrative, but you need to be able to explain what you're going to do that's going to allow you to accomplish your goals. And, again, for research, that's probably more about your methodology, how you're going to go out and conduct the research, analyze the data, these kind of things. For a program, it might be the clients you're going to serve, how you're going to serve them, all of these things. And as I say, usually sometimes if it's a work plan, it's in a chart. Usually it's a narrative, so you're giving a written description. But a lot of this feeds back into your budget. So if you're talking about, you're going to go out and conduct a survey, so you want to talk about that, or does the survey cost any money? If I'm going to travel and give this survey out at 10 sites, then somewhere in your budget you should probably reflect travel to 10 sites to conduct a survey. If it's a program and we're going to need an RN to help conduct this program, then you probably ought to have personnel in your budget. So a lot of what you say here ties back to your budget, and vice versa. Your budget should tie back to this. And as you write more grants and you get into that, you can use those two elements to save a lot of time and space. Sometimes when you don't have a lot of time, you can put things in one part in like a budget justification that elaborates more on what you say here, but everything needs to work together, and that's one thing. So as you talk about how you're doing it, your budget really just reflects the resources to do that. You know, one thing with your methods, and I'll give some examples here, but a logic model, I don't know if y'all have dealt with those, and if you want, I've got a link somewhere. I think it's the Robert Wood Johnson or Rockefeller Foundation, one of these national foundations that has like a 30-page thing that's very detailed in how you go about a logic model. But more and more funders are wanting to see this kind of thing. And even if you don't need it for the grant, if you understand the elements to a logic model, it's probably a good thought exercise, because it really makes you sit down and think about how you know, the logic of what you're trying to do, from the inputs to the activities, to the outputs, to the outcomes. And that's, you know, something that you need to do. So, you know, with your objectives, you need to have those exact tasks, the activities, the who, the what, the when, the how you'll measure things, how you'll benchmark things so you can evaluate. That helps with your evaluation and measuring progress and things like that. So these are some of the things that you would talk about. Your outcome objective, here's one. You know, within 6 months, parents will report children are eating 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. That's your outcome, you know, because that's what it's measuring. I mean, again, here you can see, talking about the SMART, you know, it's time-bound, 6 months, eating 5 servings, fruits and vegetables, very specific. You know, it follows all that: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound. That's your outcome objective. A method would be more about to achieve greater fruit and vegetable intake, culturally appropriate information to parents each month, sending home 1 sheet, providing 1 food preparation. So this is more of your method, your how. The other is more your objective. Again, you can see here, though, some of the same stuff, you know, timely, once a month, you know, what you're going to do, those kind of things. Okay, so you talked about your need, you talked about, you know, this is the need we're going to solve. This is our goals in solving it. These are our methods of how we're going to go about solving it. So the next thing you need to do is talk about your evaluation plan. And this is, you know, the evaluation plan is more and more, in the time I've been involved in grant writing, you see this more and more, a larger component. Places that didn't used to ask for this are now asking for it, or they give it more weight. And a lot of this comes back to basically the funders want to know, are you being successful? How do you measure success? They're wanting to hold you a little more accountable, because particularly state and federal funders are being held accountable by elected officials for how they spend the money. So they need to know, have some way. I mean, the idea that, well, we conducted the research so that we did it, it's successful. I mean, I used to work for a nonprofit arts organization, and that's kind of what you could say when I first started. We had an event, we held it, people came, it was great. And that was kind of sufficient. They didn't want a whole lot more. Now they want to know, tell us about the demographics of your audience, what's your economic impact, you know, how do you determine if this is a successful event? And so you've got to come up with all these measures that really talk about if you achieved what you wanted to do, or it was implemented as planned. And sometimes one, sometimes the other, sometimes both. I mean, so. And your evaluation plan, you know, the outcome is going to be, did you get the results you wanted? You know, and how you measure that. And that's something you need to think about, you know. I think Dr. Hall kind of touched on that when you're putting all this together and your methods and stuff, because a lot of this, you know, not only in your grant, but then if you have to get, if it's a research thing and you have to get an IRB approval, a lot of this, the IRB is going to want to know about your methods and your evaluation and things like that, because if you're dealing with surveys or other things, you've got human subjects. That's where they're going to be concerned about that. Your process, you know, that's just how you evaluate that. some grants, I think they're kind of looking more at the business thing. I know the other day we had some of the faculty talking about a HRSA grant we're looking at, and one of the key components in that is about this process improvement. They want to see rapid quality, continuous quality improvement built into the grant. So, they're looking, as I say, at some ideas that come from the business community. These things kind of change over time, but this is becoming more and more a thing. And as I say, sometimes it asks you one outcome, sometimes the other. When you think about your evaluation, who will collect the information? What information do you need? How will you analyze it? Is it especially if it's statistical information? Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? What types of reports will be produced? And how will the results be used? And again, that could be internally. If it's a process, how will that help if you've got an agency and you're doing a program, how will you use that internally to improve your processes? Or if it's a research thing, the evaluation results, usually you'll see something, I've seen that, I know NIH grants ask for that, a dissemination plan. How will you disseminate the results of your research? So you got to talk about, I look to publish this article here, make presentations, all this kind of thing, because they want to see that what you're doing doesn't just benefit you, it can benefit others. And that's one thing you'll see a lot of times funders do that. They have a limited amount of resources. You may have great ideas, they can't fund everything. I mean, that's the problem. So they pick things that they think are replicable and kind of fund as a pilot study, and they want you to disseminate all of that information so others can learn from your mistakes or your successes. And I mean, especially if you have this process thing, sometimes people think, well, things didn't go quite as planned. That's all right if you know how to measure that and can justify what happened in the plan, why it didn't work. I mean, because, but if you don't even have the measures to know if it went as planned, how would you know if it didn't? So, this is a key thing. This is actually a lot of what we end up doing in the Center of Nursing Research centers around this. So there are resources on campus or other places to help you with this too. I mean, don't think you have to do a lot of this alone, but this is something you really need to think about. Different tools for evaluations, what you might look at, observation, activity logs, attendance, minutes, reports, interviews, physical measurements, surveys, existing data. There's a lot of different things you can look at. That all depend on what you're trying to do, what your methods are, what's available. I mean, you don't want to be the old saying is, whatever you count's what's important. So, really think about what the metrics are that you're going to use in terms of evaluation. And as Dr. Hall mentioned, this is one of those things that's not necessarily mystical, although sometimes people try to make it mystical and sometimes people think it is mystical. But, really your budget is just talking about what resources do I need to carry out what I just said through my methods, my activities, all that. I need certain resources. And, the resources that I'm going to need are my direct costs. And you'll see certain categories. And a lot of times the budget form even has those object categories for you. Personnel. Again, if we're going to conduct surveys, you should have somebody, either a position or a portion of their position, to conduct those surveys. I mean, you said this is an activity we're going to do. There's a cost associated with it. So you need that. We're going to need supplies for these surveys. We're going to need paper and pencils and things like that. We might need equipment. Maybe you need a piece of equipment or something. You're going to do the surveys electronically, so you need iPads. So travel, we need to go somewhere and give out these surveys. I mean, if you've talked about all that in your methods, it should show back up in your budget. Other costs that are necessary. All these are direct costs. These are things that you have identified that you need to carry out and implement whatever you talked about previously. Then you have a whole different category that a lot of people don't really understand, but these are the indirect costs. Typically, you'll see this as F&A, facilities administration, overhead, a lot of things that are part of the project cost, but you can't. It's not directly related, and it's hard to split out. For example, if you're going to work in an office and you're going to make calls to set up the interviews, you probably don't want to log down and try to figure out the exact cost of every phone call, or that you were in that office for 2.4 hours and you use so many kilowatts of electricity every day. And most funding agencies understand there are certain costs to doing business that you can't put in there, and they'll give you that money. If you do a research grant, especially with the federal government, they'll tell you either what the rate is, they'll say it's capped at this amount of indirect cost, or it's a negotiated rate, and here ETSU negotiates with the federal government, and they have a certain rate depending on if it's on campus, if it's off campus, where it is, and that's the rate that you can get those indirect costs. From the applicants, as a project director, as a PI, you probably don't think much about that, but from the organization that's applying, that is a very, you want to capture those costs. In fact, that's a big part of my job, is to make sure the paperwork's filled out, that if we don't capture those costs, we say why. And sometimes they'll say, we're not going to pay overhead, we're just paying for the project. But a lot of, particularly nonprofits, they apply and they forget about indirect costs, and then they complain, we need operating money. Why can't we find operating money? But they never put the overhead into their project cost. And anytime it's allowable, do that, or you're leaving money on the table. If you ever need a match, sometimes you can use things that are indirect to match the cost. So again, I've done that years ago when I was with the arts organization. I took staff time to match to get state money, and then I took the state money and matched to get federal money, so I ended up with about $25,000 that I didn't have to put anything up, but all of it had to be matched. So there's a little game you have to play if you deal with matching funds too. But as you get into the budget process, you can do that. The last thing is, with a budget, justify what you say. If we're talking about the travel, I'm going to give out surveys at 10 sites. The average distance to each site's 5 miles at 50 cents a mile, so that people can see how you arrived at that number. A reviewer looks at this, they're going to look, is that a reasonable number? And so you need to provide them as much information, because when you send this stuff in, what you write is what they have to go off of. So you can't say, well, I assume they know, that these sites are just down the road, and I'm sending it to the federal government. They should know what the standard mileage rate is. Why do I need to tell them? I mean, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to see that. You also want to make sure that, again, in that budget justification, you can show. You may not be able to talk about it in the narrative part in your methods, but by showing a high level of detail in your justification, you show that you've really thought through what you're going to do. What you plan to do, and that shows that you're not just kind of, we kind of would like to do this. That you have a real solid plan. All you need is them to give you the money over here to fill in that missing gap. And that's really what you want to make it easy for them to give you the money. That you're back to that point. We're the experts. We know what we want to do. We have it all planned out. We just need a little bit of money. This last piece is becoming more and more crucial too, sustainability. Again, a lot of grants, they don't like to fund operating support, ongoing support. I've heard that from various elected officials. If you talk to them, I've done that in the past, about funding, and is this a one-time request? And if you can say yes, they tend to be more supportive than if it's something that's going to be ongoing, because they don't want to make these ongoing commitments to something. So that's why you see a lot of things that are projects You may start out with a project that's a really big idea. Try to think of ways to break it down, scale it down into, again, what's achievable and meets the funder's goal. And you may say, I'll go to this agency for this part, and then once that's done, I'll go over here and try to get this funding, and you can build on things. And sometimes there's a whole strategy behind how you actually can get larger things accomplished. And you can talk about that. You can talk about, with the sustainability, if you bring new people on, or is the organization then just going to absorb them into their annual budget when it's over, or are you going to look for other sources of funding? Well, once you start this program, if it's a program, once you start it, you need seed funding to get it started, but once it gets going, it'll provide its own sources of revenue that will allow the program to continue. That's what you want to talk about. And you want to be able to show, again, that what you get started will continue. Matching and cost share, the federal government sometimes doesn't ask for this, which is nice. But the state and foundations particularly look at that. And, really, again, here, you want to show that they're not the only source of funding that's here. I mean, if you can, you want to show organizational funds. That as an organization, we believe in this enough. We've committed some of our own resources. We don't have all the resources. That's why we need your help. But we've committed some of our own resources. And again, some of those can be those indirect costs, things you're going to do anyway. But you want to show that. If you are applying to another foundation for funds, you want to show that. You want to show that really what the funders want to see is you're not relying on one source of funding, that you're trying to leverage money. I mean, if you're getting state and federal and foundation, depends on the project, but they like to see that mix of money, that you're not the only person that's being asked for funds. Your summary, as I say, it just kind of goes over all this. It's very concise. It's like an abstract, really. It's the first thing that most people will see, but it should be the last thing you write, because once you've went through all this, it's much easier to write this. You might start with a draft or something, but you want to come back to this last, and you want to make it brief. Most places will tell you no more than 1 page, usually, for an abstract. They don't want to see a lot, but that's a very important document, because that's the first thing they're going to see, and you need to really hit the high points of what you're doing. Sometimes if it's a federal grant, your abstract is what gets published on the website regarding your study. So again, you need to think through if you've got something proprietary or something you don't want out there. You don't want to necessarily put it in the abstract, but that's what people are going to see. That's probably your chance to make a good first impression. Okay, so fine-tuning your proposal. You've got all those elements together. You've got it there. How do you, what's some good tips to help make a competitive proposal? First thing I would say is organize according to the announcement. They do a really good job of helping you organize it. Use their headings, follow the rules, use their packages. Especially if you deal with a federal grant, there is no leeway in this. You really need to follow what they say, and they'll tell you the areas and what you need. As far as their application, if they say use this form, use their form. When you think about it, everybody, whether it's a foundation, a state government, a local government, or a federal government, they are receiving way more requests for funding than they have the resources to give out. You don't want to give them a reason to move your application to the not pile just because you failed to follow an instruction or you failed to do something. That's the easiest way. When they get those and they go through the first review, they're looking for completeness. Basically, they're looking for reasons at that point to disqualify you, not to even read what you sent. So you don't want to, be sloppy. As Dr. Hall talked about, one of the things in this is paying that attention to detail. That's real crucial to what you're doing. Simple things, grammar, spelling, understandability, follow the format. If it says, 1-inch margins, 12-point font, 1-inch margins, 12-point font. Don't fool around with that. They could figure it out. If it says 10 pages, 10 pages. Don't go more. try not to go less. Take advantage of what they give you, but don't go more. A lot of times, places are going to these online applications, and let me tell you, they not only count words, they count characters, and it won't even take it if you don't get down to the right amount of characters. They won't let you push the submit button. But the grammar, the spelling, the understandability, Dr. Hall talked about this too, and it's a good point. It's a collaborative thing. You look to your colleagues, to other people, have them read this over. And my background is clearly not in nursing, so if somebody writes something and I can understand it, then it's pretty clear. I mean, I'm learning more and more of the terminology and stuff, but sometimes you get so bogged down in the jargon, or exactly what you want, that it's hard for others to understand. So you got to think of who is reading this. Appendices, whatever you can do. Like I say, letters of commitment, that's always great, especially if you have partners you want to show. Not if you put a partner in there and say, we're going to work with this organization, have them write you a letter. The best thing you can do if you want a letter for your application, write the letter for them. Make it easy for your partner to submit that letter back to you on their letterhead. I do that. Sometimes people change and to make it say what they want. A lot of times they will take literally what you've written, word for word, put it on their letterhead, print it, sign it, and send it back to you. So that way, if you've got 5 letters of support, you can have each partner saying what you want them to say, or they get some idea, because a lot of times people are willing to write a letter of support, but they're like, I don't know what to say. So you want to make it as easy as possible for people to help you in this. Edit. I mean, you can't, like I say, edit these things enough. I think that's a point Dr. Hall had made. As many people as you can to look at this. Because after a while, you're so focused on this, and I do that. I mean, you know what a sentence should say, and you read it, and the words are wrong. I mean, but you don't pick up on it because your mind plays that little trick on you. So as many people as you can to have look at it. Focus. Make sure it's very focused. Okay, some of these things I went and found online, just common problems, and you'll kind of see some themes here, but things not to use, not to do. Not recognizing the value of plain English. Again, keep things simple and plain English. Using vague statements. The project will be evaluated by the board of directors during their monthly meetings. Well, what does that mean? I mean, how are they going to evaluate it? I mean, it tells you a little bit of who and when, but you need to be, sometimes to take a vague statement like that, all you need to do is add 2 or 3 other words about, the project will be evaluated, and then, just a few more words to that same sentence, and it makes it much more specific, much more concrete. And that's what you want to do. You want to show, we know what we're going to do with this funds when we get it. Buzzwords and jargons, acronyms, technical terms, trying to say too much, repeat. That's a fine line that as you write more grants, you'll learn. On one hand, you don't want to keep repeating yourself over and over, but sometimes a little bit of repetition is not a bad thing. And sometimes the way forms are set up, you have to repeat yourself. But you don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over. Proofreading and editing, that's probably one of the easiest things that you can change. And again, that's just being sloppy. And I had somebody once say, well, what does it matter if I'm sloppy or with the proofreading or in the budget? Or if I don't fill out the instructions. And think about it from the funder's point of view. If you can't do something that's that isn't sloppy, that the numbers don't add up right, and it's incomplete, why would I give you hundreds of thousands of dollars? I mean, you can't even fill out the paperwork right and make sure it's complete or add your numbers up. What makes me trust you with my money? So proposing more work that can be done. Again, make sure your proposal fits. If you If you're only getting $10,000 over 6 months, you're not going to cure cancer in that period of time with that amount of money. So you know, your request needs to be reasonable to the time and the amount of money. You don't want to overpromise, because that can set yourself up for some problems. You know, you want a right program, wrong funder, wrong program, right funder. You want to make sure that's a good fit between who you're asking for and what you're doing. You don't want to focus on the needs and the problems. Yes, you want to set that background, but you want to talk about what you're going to do, how you're going to solve a problem, how you're going to address an issue. Portraying a we think we can attitude. You know, you should write this as though you already have the funding. This, not, if we get the money, we might do this. No, we are going to do this. You assume you're going to get the money. They know you don't have the money. They haven't written the check yet. So you want to talk about how you're going to do this, because it makes it sound more confident that you know what you're doing. All we need is that check. All we need is that one piece of the resources. Your budget, you know, of course, you know, again, if you have a sloppy budget, what makes you think you're going to handle the money right? A clear link between the need, the plan, the budget, all of those three documents should work together. A really good grant put together right, you could take the budget and the justification and figure out what they're trying to do just from that, if it's really done right. Assuming the reader knows you, again, you know, especially for an organization, you got to talk a little bit about why you're qualified to do this. You can't just assume they know who you are. You want to talk about what you do and why you're capable of doing things.